Is everyone here that signed up? Like, should I get started or?
Think we have like 9 people so far, including us, so maybe we can wait like a minute or 2, maybe start at like 2:35.
Yeah, oh, that sounds great.
Okay, perfect.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
Elliot, do you want people to write in the chat for now whether or not they're applying this cycle for MD PhD programs or just like if they're like just here for funsies or something?
Oh, yeah, sure. Whatever people are comfortable with. This is kind of for a broad audience. So if folks want to, that's fine. Uh, Okay, cool. I think it looks like we're stable around eight or nine folks. So I can get started if y'all like. And I'll just briefly introduce myself. So I'm Elliot. I'm a fifth year student in the Tri-I MD PhD program. So we're over on, the east side, like 70th Street in York. It's been really wonderful living in New York, and several of my classmates or folks in the program are, also from Hunter College. So I'm really excited to be able to speak with you today in particular. So, the congratulations on getting to this step at least, which is coming to a workshop, whether you're fully committed to applying to MD PhD programs or you're just kind of thinking about it. Hopefully this presentation will work for you. I'll have some, general advice. We'll get into what these essays entail. And throughout the presentation, please, um, you can interrupt with questions, you can write in the chat box, whatever. I'll try to monitor it, although sometimes Zoom can be a little finicky. But with that being said, I guess I can get started. I was thinking back. I applied I started the program in July 2020, and I applied that prior year. So it's been a few years since I've been there, but I definitely feel for all of you who are embarking on this process. Um, so just a brief overview is the American Association of Medical Colleges. That's the AAMC. Coordinates the AMCAS application. This is kind of like the common app for medical schools and MD PhD programs, MD programs and MD PhD programs. And one of the key features of the AMCAS application, which can kind of be long, is the personal comments essay. This is like a personal statement. And on this slide, I'm showing what are the guidelines for the personal comments essay. And for this one, um, admissions committees place a lot of weight on this essay. And the goal or the questions they want you to answer in writing this is, why have you selected the field of medicine broadly? What motivates you to learn about medicine? And what you want medical schools to know that hasn't already been disclosed in other sections of the application. And so it's a pretty, important section of your application. And for this one, it's more about like what brought you to even consider careers in medicine, in healthcare. And so it's pretty general. And then as we're getting further into these different essays, we'll get more and more specific and specifically discuss MD PhD programs. Um, People, when they write these personal comments essays, might focus on specific hardships or challenges that they've experienced as they've gone through their educational path. Um, would comment on fluctuations in the academic record, but the idea is like, what brought you to this moment of applying to medical school? Generally, it's about 5,300 characters long, about a page. Spaces are counted as characters, so you have kind of limited space. Next, which I'll be focusing on for the most of this workshop, are the MD PhD program specific essays. So if you're applying to MD PhD programs, you have to write 2 additional essays. So there's the MD PhD essay and the significant research experience essay. And these are specifically geared towards stating your reasons for pursuing this combined degree. And I'll get into that more in a moment. This one is limited to about 3,000 characters, so a little less than a single page. Um, and then there's the significant research experience essay. So, as you're applying to MD PhD programs, this is another essay where you describe, illustrate your significant research experiences. And so this is where it's kind of like an in-depth CV, where if you consider your CV or resume as your outline, you'll go in detail into your specific research experiences in that CV. And so here you can specify your supervisor's name and affiliation, the duration of the experience, the problem you studied, et cetera. And we'll get into that in more detail later. This essay is limited to a whopping 10,000 characters. So the personal statement, 5,300, the MD PhD essay, 3,000. Significant research experience essays can be pretty long, 10,000 characters, but that doesn't mean you need to be wordy. It just gives you a lot of room to kind of share your story in detail. I'll get into that more later. But first, I just want to briefly review what are MD PhD admissions. Is an MD PhD program right for you? There's this great paper written by the director of the University of Pennsylvania program, Lawrence Brass. And so he wrote this a few years ago in 2018. And I actually looked at this article as I was, considering applying to MD PhD programs back in the day. And there are a few key notes from this paper. The first question he kind of dives into is, do I really need a PhD to do research? And what he says is clearly not. You can easily do, an MD program alone and then have a full career in research. In fact, some of the strongest mentors at the Tri-I campus are folks who were trained specifically in an MD program, but then as they graduated and went into their career, they got heavily involved in research and they ended up switching gears into that. That being said, while medical school places you on the path to becoming a really accomplished, successful clinician, it does not really provide long-term training in how to actually do research. And so if you're listening to this talk and you're wondering like, I'm sure I want to be a doctor, but I'm less sure that I actually want to be a scientist or research. What Dr. Brass's advice was to just apply for MD programs, figure out the rest later on. And so MD PhD program admissions committees are specifically looking for, your plans for the future. What are those? And are they compatible with the goals of MD PhD training? And they're also looking for extensive research experience. And so he kind of gets into this in more detail. And so if you are aiming to, thrive and succeed in an MD PhD program and have a career that's compatible with the, goals of an MD PhD program, your goal should be to become a physician investigator, a physician scientist who would spend about 75% of your time on research. And so that's what he writes, and it can be a little bit more variable than that, but that in your as you're applying to these programs, that should be kind of the goal you have in mind. Like I want to have a really strong training in both clinical medicine and in research, and in the future, I want to bridge the gap between the clinic and the lab, and spend most of my time running a lab and pursuing these research projects. Um, that being said, you don't need to know what you actually want to research in the future. In fact, many people, as they enter medical school, have some interests, like in neuroscience. Then they find that they totally switch gears and they study something like immunology, or maybe something on a totally different path. And so, do know that your interests right now are likely to change as you just go through your training. Um, all of that said, what I have in bold here is that your commitment to becoming a researcher and investigator should be clearly communicated in this whole process of your applications and your essays and in your interviews. And you should really show that you've given thought to what will be ultimately required of you. Does that make sense so far? Do you have any questions at this moment? Okay, cool. Maybe I'll keep moving on. So let's now approach the MD PhD essay. What's the big picture? So the key question here that you're trying to answer is why MD and that's the key word here, PhD. And you need to show that you would not be satisfied with a career that didn't involve both medical research and clinical practice. And I see we have a comment. One second. Yes, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah. Please write your questions in the chat and we can get to those at the end. Um, yeah. And so the key word here is and, why MD and PhD. And so your goal is to be able to bridge the two. And, it's very easy. There are amazing people who pursue an MD alone. There are amazing people who pursue a PhD alone. Now the question is, why do you want to pursue both of them in a formal program? And so you have to really demonstrate that pursuing one or the other is just not right for you. You really want both degrees, both trainings. And sometimes people will apply to MD PhD programs thinking like, I can't choose between a medical degree or a medical program and a scientific program. I'm still like figuring things out. I'm not sure. And so then they'll write their essay and they appear indecisive. That's not what we're going for when we're approaching the ME PhD essay. The reader should come away convinced that you want to do both, in tandem. And then ultimately, your future goals, you should show that you want to be most fulfilled working as a physician scientist. Um, I briefly hinted at this before, but your MD PhD essay should answer how your experiences and qualifications and your interests combine science and medical practice. You're going to be one to bridge the bench, the lab bench and the bedside in the clinic. And what should, some key perspective is that your passions for clinical work and research are not actually separate. They can actually be synergistic. They can complement each other, benefit each other. You pursue one and you're even stronger in the other, and vice versa. The MD PhD essay alone is giving readers an understanding of why are you even applying to MD PhD programs, and so you can highlight a few experiences that were really formative or important in your history and your academic development. But this is not necessarily the place to go into really detailed descriptions of the research you were actually doing. That one will go into the significant research experiences essay. Um, what's also important in this essay is, maybe discuss what you learned from your experiences, how they made you who you are now. And to that end, you want to convey certain qualities that MD PhD, admissions committees are looking for, and that's, creativity, curiosity, maturity, the ability to critically think and consider data and evidence, some level of perseverance and grit, because these training programs are hard, and failure is just kind of like a common um, feature of research. You have a PCR that doesn't work one day. You have, your hypothesis doesn't match what the data actually shows, and that's where kind of the fun of research comes in. That's like the meat of the research experience. Then you can also show that you like take initiative, you pursue experiences, you think creatively, and ultimately you do want to show this love for research. Um, and then at the end of the essay, you should probably discuss what your goals are for your career at this moment, like what you envision your life looking like. And so if you have a particular field in mind or research interests you hope to pursue, definitely mention it here. For example, if you're interested in the genomics of, or the genetics of cancer or of psychiatric diseases, you can mention that there. And hopefully it's, a logical kind of next step given what you've already highlighted in the essay. Like you don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time discussing, research experiences A and B if they don't ultimately relate to um, your goals for your career. But if there's kind of a clear, if you describe like how you've made these decisions, maybe that would work. And so how do we structure the MD PhD essay? So this is just intro, body, conclusion. The kind of structure is relatively straightforward. In the intro, you're trying to introduce the reader to the main message. Why are you pursuing this joint program? Why MD and PhD? And at this point, you want to captivate your reader, grab their attention with a unique start, and consider beginning your essay to make it unique. You can bring in your personal experiences, your anecdotes that introduce the topic. And if, as you're brainstorming, you can think about what are the most meaningful experiences that you've had that have convinced you to pursue this career. That would be one way to kind of start with your brainstorming. Then we move into the body of the essay. And so the body answers, how are you qualified? How are you prepared to thrive in MD PhD programs? And so here again, you're sharing your key academic experiences, whether they're courses, lab experiences, summer research programs, etc., that highlight your understanding and appreciation of, bridging the bench and the bedside, highlight your academic skills and competencies and the qualities that will, help you, really succeed in MD PhD programs. And one of the key points for all of these is to, it's kind of written in a narrative style, like, I pursued this, experience in this lab. This is what I learned from that experience. Or, as I was working in the lab studying cancer, I was volunteering in a hospital taking care of cancer patients, and I really gained an appreciation for how, the work I was doing in the lab benefited my, clinical volunteering experiences, something like that. Um, and so here the do is to show, be concrete and concise, ground readers in concrete experiences, and then write in your own voice what you learned from those experiences. And then in this essay, you don't want to just tell the reader and like write like a CV, just give bullet points about, the experiences you've done. And, there are spaces in the AMCAS application to do that, to write in a CV style format. But here you really want to, tell your story, tell how your experiences have brought you to this point and how they have like contributed to what your future goals are. So this is the meat of the MD PhD essay. And then you conclude, and the conclusion can be relatively short. It recaps your motivations for applying, it brings it home. What I was trying to say before is that the conclusion should be really like, it should flow very logically. Like after the reader reads the introduction and the body, they should immediately anticipate what you're going to write in the conclusion. So like, what are your future goals? How are those compatible with the missions of MD PhD programs? It can just be a few sentences. So that's kind of my primer on writing the MD PhD essay. I have some links at the end of this presentation to some helpful resources that might help you as you begin this process, and I'll have some general advice a little later on. I don't see there are any questions in the chat. Feel free to add those in as we're going along here, but I'm going to switch gears now to discussing the significant research experience essay. So here is where you're going to get into, finer detail about the showing that you have the experiences necessary to thrive in these graduate programs, and that you can communicate your research effectively. So the best essays in this section are the ones that blend both narrative writing, kind of telling that story, and scientific writing, like diving deep into what projects you have done. And I'll describe what that means in a moment. Um, and so what matters most in this section is that you can reflect on the foundations of your work, what you did in your work, and then what are the implications of your work? Like what are the conclusions or future directions? And then for the narrative kind of part of it, it's like what lessons have you learned? And so these are the kind of, you're telling the story of your research background. As you write this essay or brainstorm, the questions to keep in mind is like, what was your first significant introduction to research? How did that, what effect did that have on you? What did you do? What inspired you to continue, as you go from experience to experience, like what inspired you to pursue those next experiences, even if they're in totally different fields? Like I, I started off studying, HIV. I was in a virology lab, and I got so fascinated by the use of data and statistics in that group, and in like the genomes of the genome of HIV, that then I pursued an experience in cancer genetics, because I wanted to see how do viruses cause cancer, or how do the driver mutations in the genome lead to the development of cancer. It's like, how do you connect the dots, like from A to B to C? Um, and so that's kind of getting into like what led you from one experience to the next. And then, kind of go like, were you consistent in your commitment? Did you like take initiative? Did you help contribute substantially to the projects that you were involved in? And then how did one of the most important features that a lot of admissions committees are looking for is, how do you deal with challenges? How do you deal with failures? As I mentioned before, I fail on a regular basis in my lab, but it's not about, getting hit down with a failure. It's how you bounce back from failure, how you learn from that failure and move on. And so remember in this essay that your readers, the reviewers, are likely not in your field, and they may be tired from reading all the other essays. And so you want to write in a way that is accessible to a broad audience. Um, and so the idea is that excellent essays resonate across backgrounds. You get into detail, but when you get in, when you describe jargon or specific terms, you kind of inform the reader what this all means. And so the do's for this essay are, or yeah, I guess do like avoid too much redundancy with your other essays. You're writing a lot as you're applying to these programs, and so you want to see like, what are the main questions I need to answer in each essay, and how do I make sure I'm not being too redundant? And that takes some fine tuning. And I honestly, in order to avoid redundancy, I wrote all my essays, had like drafts of the essays, and then I saw like, oh, can I cut out this part from this essay because I already discussed it in another essay, etc. So it's kind of fine tuning once everything's said and done. Describe your experiences right through the lens of the scientific method. I'll describe that in a moment. And what's really important to get across to the readers is how you personally contributed to these projects. Like, it's not enough to join a project, do the bare minimum. And, even if it turns out to like a conference presentation or a paper, whatever, I think it's more meaningful for admissions committees what you personally contributed to your different projects. And honestly, sometimes it's even more important that you were significantly involved in a project and you learned a lot from that project than actually having a paper at the end of the day. Like, how did you personally contribute to the projects that you were on? You want to include technical details, but again, at an accessible level. And then you want to convey what, student and researcher you are right now and what you hope to become, and again, convey admirable personal qualities. And finally, you don't want to be too wordy or jargony. Like the significant research experience essay gives you 10,000 characters, which is a lot of space to work with, but you don't want to just fill up that space for the sake of filling it up. You want to be succinct and concise, get your point across in, fewer words is better. Because again, your readers are tired and they don't necessarily want to read through a ton of, superfluous language. So I just want to spend a moment digging into the scientific method again. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this at this point, but this is a really helpful guide for how you want to dig into your experiences. And I'll have an example a little later on, kind of shows this in practice. But so like, how do scientists approach science? Well, first they start with a question, and they do a question that's compelling, interesting, that doesn't have an answer right now. Then they do their background research, and through doing extensive background research, construct a hypothesis. And this is like an educated guess about what might be happening. And then spend a lot of your time on just testing. Like, what experiments do I need to do to test this hypothesis? To ultimately answer that question. Then there's a lot of redundancy. Like, are my experiments working? If not, how do I troubleshoot them? If they are working, then what data am I getting? Does the data make sense? Do they support or refute the hypothesis, etc.? Then you get to the point where are the results aligned with the hypothesis? That's great. Now you got to communicate that. If the results don't align, though, or they partially align or whatever with the hypothesis, then you have to figure out, go back to, step zero, figure out like, oh, do I need to fine tune my hypothesis? Is there some confounding variable that might be featured here? Do I need to consider different experiments to like test this hypothesis to kind of figure out like why are the results not aligning with it? Do I need to do more background research, etc.? But then the end goal is communicating your results. And so let's say you have 3 meaty research experiences. You'll start off by, this is experience 1, and use the scientific method to kind of guide your narrative storytelling about, in the essay in experience 1. Then in experience 2, you'll do the same thing, scientific method. What's the question? What sort of background research did you do? What was that main hypothesis? And then how did you test that hypothesis with experiments, etc. So use this to frame your narrative. Um, I pulled this example from an online resource showing kind of how not to write the significant research essay. And I'll share these slides with you so that you can review them on your own time and your whatever. But maybe I'll give like a minute or two for y'all to just read this. Um, and uh, and then I'll have a question about like what do you like about this essay entry and what do you not like about this entry. So maybe I'll give you that minute starting now. Okay, maybe you had a chance to read through this. It's okay if not, maybe you got a general sense. Um, I'd just like to ask you, after reading this entry, what did you like about the essay? And so I can keep this open for y'all.
I mean, I can share what I liked and I didn't like. So,
Sure.
I liked how specific they were, so you can tell they had like a serious role in whatever this project was. But I think based off of the last slide that you went over, it's very wordy and jargony. Like if I was
Mm.
like someone who wasn't into physics, I wouldn't understand anything that they were going into. So I guess they can try to make it more narrative instead of just like vomiting stuff from their project. So I think that's something they could work on. But I like how you can obviously tell they're passionate about like the research that they've done.
Awesome. Great points. I thought very similarly too. Mm. Does anybody else have any thoughts too? Oh yeah, I see Christine says, it's stepwise. That's great too. Yeah, like you can kind of get a sense that they're going for the scientific method here, kind of introducing the project and discussing, their personal role, etc. The different experiments they performed. And then, at the end, they end with their communication efforts. Yeah. Anybody else? It's okay. Mm. Yeah, has a lot of jargon, didn't understand anything. Yeah, Anissa, that's exactly right. It's very tricky to read. Yeah, and so I mean that gets to this point that just know what your readers are looking for. Like it's kind of like being kind to the reader is maybe one of the main lessons for any application you ever write. It's like who might they be and how can I craft my essay to fit what they need at like 10:30 p.m. after a full day of work. They're finally getting home. They're exhausted, and then they're sitting down to read your application. How do you make it easy for them to learn? Nietzsche says, yeah, overwhelming in a sense, but the passion comes across. Yeah, yeah, and the impact that they had. Yeah, that definitely comes through in this. I agree for sure. It's like um, what I do like about this too is yeah, they're describing their role. It's not like they're just kind of joining a team and sitting in the background. Like they're doing a lot of work themselves, and that's something that admissions committees definitely want to see. Um, and a lot of my classmates they didn't have necessarily like papers published or have gone to conferences. Some of them were like had these significant research experiences, but their papers didn't come until a little later, or they never came, etc. So that's not a requirement. It's more about like, can you tell your story and dig into how you contributed to these projects? In science, there can be a lot of luck, and that's something that admissions committees remember. Cool. Well, thank you so much for participating. I think that's a great review of this entry. Um, and these are just some ideas here. Like, I kind of like the format. There was a heading for the experience, which included like kind of the PI's name, the university, duration of their involvement. Um, a wall of text is exhausting, so it's kind of nice to split up your essay into sections, like by discrete research experiences, etc. Um, it's definitely interesting research, and that passion in dark matter particle physics kind of comes through in that entry. Presents a research problem and how the student worked themselves to overcome it. And it's pretty cool that the student also collaborated across institutions and took the initiative to present their work in several different venues. Um, that being said, yeah, the stuff we didn't like, so the jargon and the wordiness doesn't translate to people outside of physics and math. Um, they start off by discussing this like connection. Um, I entered college as a physics major because the field's emphasis on stats and programming was invaluable for my goal of pursuing computational-based genomic research. It's kind of like you can kind of see what they're going towards. You can maybe make some assumptions. They're interested in computation, but we could definitely get more specific. Like it's kind of like going back in the day, you're at a restaurant, you're trying to connect the dots on, one of those, coloring papers or whatever. Like connect the dots for the reader. Go from A to B to C. Don't skip points. Make it really clear how you've reflected at each level of your experiences. Um, The author writes about Monte Carlo, like I forget where it is. Oh yeah, the Monte Carlo simulations. It's like that in and of itself is jargon. It's like how, what is who is Monte Carlo? What is Monte Carlo? How do we interpret this? Could we have written an, better introduction into what is Monte Carlo simulation if that's really essential to getting their point across? And then, this sentence here just really illustrates the jargon and wordiness. Next, I use contrastive principal components analysis to extract and compare pulses reconstructed inconsistently by three collaboration design pulse reconstruction algorithms, learning to integrate statistical validity into my problem solving. What does that mean? I have no idea what this sentence is trying to get across. Um, and so here is a start to revisiting the essay. I've bolded a few sections that I think do a good job, I guess, at kind of priming the reader, giving them that foundation to understand what they did next. Um, and so, for example, I entered college as a physics major because I was curious about the fundamental principles that underpin all of science, and I wanted to improve my understanding of stats and programming. Ultimately, I knew that I wanted to apply these skills to the field of computational genomics research. I think that's a good starting point to revising this, captivating introductory sentences. I think it could use even still some more work. But that being said, maybe this student spent a lot of time in their MD PhD essay describing their interest in computational genomics. And so maybe they don't have to go into that level of detail in this entry because they've already discussed it extensively elsewhere. Um, and then in the next, I won't go through all of this. I'll let you do that on your own time. But in the next bolded section, it's like, after the lab housing the detector experienced a power outage, mystery pulses inconsistent with particle collisions appeared. I investigated the origin of the mystery pulses. In the previous iteration of this essay, they just kind of let it, folks take for granted that there were these mystery pulses. They didn't really explain what those were, how those came to be, etc. Here, they're priming the reader. They're introducing, this is something that we can all, understand with all the electrical outages after storms in the city, whatever. It's like after there was a power outage, stuff appeared that we couldn't explain immediately. And then they also, this is the last thing I kind of describe, is that they learned to cope with lab failure while pursuing multiple unsuccessful hypotheses to explain these mystery pulses. Software bugs, equipment degradation, before eventually demonstrating that there was a contaminant that was responsible. And so this is showing the scientific method at work. They had not just a single hypothesis, they had multiple ones. They explored each one of those discretely, and they kind of describe what those were, like software bugs. And then they eventually demonstrated that this contaminant contributed. Um, and so they gave an example of like, how they approach testing these separate hypotheses. And so I think this is a great start to revising the essay. There's still more work to be done. It's still pretty wordy. Maybe they could separate this full block of text into two separate paragraphs, whatever. But this is, I think, a nice start to revising the essay. And so I just want to leave you with some general advice, which is to read, whenever you're approaching the essays, read the questions and the prompts thoroughly. Know what, and that's not even for these essays, this is kind of just broad for any application you ever write, whatever, just know what they're asking for and really understand those. And then reflect on your goal and the program's goals. What are they? Are they in line? Are they not? Make sure that they're in line as well as you can. Then spend a lot of time, start early and do a lot of brainstorming. I often do just like stream of consciousness. I'll just freely write out my thoughts and ideas, which is sometimes easier said than done. But you can definitely use all sorts of different tools now to brainstorm and think about your thoughts and ideas. Sometimes what I'll do is I'll just get a blank piece of paper, have like a central experience in mind, and then I'll kind of create like a spider web or like a network map about like, oh, so I had this experience. What were the key lessons I learned? And that could be the next layer of brainstorming. And then given those lessons I learned, like what else, what are the implications for that? And so you kind of just start by making this almost like network map. And that's helped me in the past for writing applications and writing essays in class, etc. But it goes to like creating an outline. Then again, can reiterate this enough, know your audience, know who might be reading your essays, and then write well, spend a lot of time proofreading, um, write, grammatically correct, sentences, make sure you uh, what I often do for this is I'll write my draft, and then I'll just spend a moment saying it out loud, just reading it as I would, a book or whatever. But I'm speaking out loud, and somehow the ear is able to pick up weird sentences better than your eyes might be able to, and so it can be helpful to speak out your essays and hear what's wrong. Um, and then as you're, start early so you have ample time to revise. It can be really useful to spend a lot of time writing and then step away for a while. If it's on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, give yourself time away from the essays. And when you come back to them with fresh or go back to them with fresh eyes, you'll, um, kind of see many maybe issues or things you like, things you don't like. Fresh eyes can make your strongest possible essay. And then finally, ask for feedback, and that can be helpful for your revisions, etc. Ask for feedback, ask for comments from others. This, but it's important to remember as you solicit feedback, don't lose your voice. It can be really easy for your voice to be drowned out by a lot of folks' ideas. And also be critical of others' feedback. Sometimes it's on point, and you're like, "Oh, that is such a great point. I'm going to make that change." Sometimes it's not so great and it kind of dilutes your voice. Like be critical as you receive feedback. Um, and so these are some sources I've used as I created this presentation. They're helpful resources potentially. There's like the article that I start off with on MD-PhD programs, the AAMC guide to applications, different guides from different institutions that are not necessarily written, all of them with MD PhD programs in mind, but are just generally helpful. Um, there are also a number of different kind of like paid consulting groups now that will where you can pay for the service of feedback. I don't advocate for those at all because you can get a lot of free feedback from people like me, even who are in MD PhD programs, or from your friends or advisors or whatever. Um, so I'm not advocating for those at all, but the links that I'm linking here are just helpful free primers on how to write MD PhD essays specifically. And I pulled a lot of text in my presentation from those. And then the scientific method image if you need to go back to that. But thank you so much for joining this call. Do you have any questions at this stage? And uh, happy to answer those now or later. And then best wishes as you embark on this process.